All right, the next lab step is to make our Linux system do DHCP. So in other words, configure our Linux as the DHCP server instead of the router. And unfortunately, I forgot to install the DHCP package we need. So the command to verify that it's not there is yum list DHCP, and it says available packages instead of installed packages. So we need to install that real quick. If you have your network set up properly, this should work. We want to hit Y for yes, install it. It's going to take a moment to download the packages and install it. And now it's installed. So now we can continue on with our configuration. The DHCPD config file, DHCPD config file is called etc dhcp dhcpd.conf. If we look at that file, it tells us, oh, hey, just kidding. There's actually no config in there, but they give us a sample file. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this sample file, right, into this location. So I'm going to go ahead and cd over to etc dhcp to make this a little easier. Notice I'm operating as root in this terminal. These things need to be done as root, so you might as well go ahead and become root. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy the sample file to the current directory, and we're going to call it dhcpd.conf. So we're going to overwrite that file that's already there with this sample file. Yes, I want to overwrite it. We're going to edit this sample file. I'm going to use the VI editor because that's my editor of choice. You can use Nano if you don't know VI because Nano is more user-friendly. You should have figured that out in the last lab we did. So I'm going to edit this dhcpd.conf file to make it be a DHCP server for my network. So if we look at the sample file, anything with a comment is with a pound sign is commented out. So we're going to scroll down here and look at some of these sample subnet configs they give us. Here's one that says it helps the server understand topology. We're going to ignore that. Very basic. This one is far too basic. These declarations start with the word subnet, include the requirements and the options, and then end with a curly bracket. Have a curly bracket up there to map that. So we're gonna find the config that is most complete and modify it to meet our needs, and then delete the other one. So this is the one we're going to use. We're going to use this a slightly different configuration for an internal subnet. So we're going to go back and delete these lines that are extra. I'm in VI, so I'm going to hit DD a bunch of times. Every time I hit DD, it deletes a line. If you're using Nano, backspace over these lines to get rid of them. So I'm going to get rid of these extra lines. And now I have the config I want to use. This is going to be for VLAN 3. So I need to modify it to match the correct configuration parameters for my VLAN 3. So the network 10.1.128, the net mask, that is a 26-bit net mask. The range, this defines the range of addresses that we want to give out. So I'm going to give out from 150 to 180. We put our server at 130, so we don't want to give out 130. Domain name servers, we are going to give out the domain name server 100, 100, 100, 2. The domain name, we will use, for now, just put cnt.lab for domain name. The router, this needs to be the router interface for that subnet, and our VLAN 3 router interface is 10.1.1.129. The broadcast address for that subnet is going to be 10.1.1.191. That's not a 1. 191. So that's the config we want to give out for VLAN 3. So we'll save that file, however it is, :WQ writes and quits in VI. If you're using Nano, it's Control X and then yes to save. And now we need to start the DHCP server. Command for that, system control start DHCPD. Hopefully it starts without errors. Mine started without errors. So now we're going to go find our Mint station. We want to open our networking settings. We want to turn off the VLAN 2 interface. And now we want to turn on the VLAN 3 interface, which if we check our diagram, ETH2 is the VLAN 3 interface. So if we turn on the VLAN 3 interface, we should get an IP address in VLAN 3. So hey, there we go, 10.1.1.150. I got a default route. I got a DNS server. So at this point, I should be able to get out to cnt.lab still. All right, so that was configuring the Linux server for VLAN 3. So for fun, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the VLAN 3 interface. All right, all my interfaces are off on Mint. So now I'm going to go back to my Linux, and I want to configure it to give out an IP address for VLAN 2. So the lab sheet has some funny words about thinking about this. So DHCP works with layer 2 broadcasts. So if I'm in VLAN 3 and I send out a layer 2 broadcast, anything in VLAN 3 will hear that. Routers will not pass layer 2 broadcast beyond the router. It's just how layer 2 broadcast works. So in this case, we want VLAN 2 to get an IP address from the server in VLAN 3 using a layer 2 broadcast, which there's no way we can send a layer 2 broadcast in VLAN 2 that will on its own make it to VLAN 3. So what we have to do is we have to tell the router, hey router, why don't you listen to see if anybody sends any DHCP request, and if you get one, send it to our server. So there's two things we need to do to make this work. One, we need to create a new DHCP scope for the VLAN 2 subnets. And then two, we need to tell the router, hey router, you listen for those DHCP requests, and if you hear one, you send that to the VLAN 3 server. So step one, we are going to edit our config again. We are going to copy these lines and paste them. So in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines. Don't forget the bottom curly bracket to close that. So if you're using the VI editor, you can type a 9 and then YY to yank 9 lines. And then you come down here where you want to put it and hit a P to paste it. And now we have copied those 9 lines. So now we need to go modify this for our other subnets. So we will change the subnet to 10.1.1.0. We will change the subnet mask to be a 25-bit mask. We will change the range to be within our subnet. DNS servers can stay the same. Domain name can stay the same. Our router will be 10.1.1.1. And the broadcast address for that subnet with that mask is going to be 127. 10.1.127. So, yeah. All right. So that changed my config. I need to restart the service so that it will reread the config file. After we finish restarting the server, we're going to go to our router and configure it to support our new changes. So what we need to do is we need to tell that interface for VLAN 2 that it should forward DHCP requests. So we go into the interface config. The command for that is IP helper address and then the IP address of the DHCP server. So any DHCP requests that come in to this router interface will be forwarded over to that DHCP server. And then, we still have the DHCP config on this router, so you never really know how developers are gonna write code. So we still have this config on here, so it's possible that it might still want to serve addresses even though there's a helper address. So to eliminate the possibility of that, what we're going to do is we're going to disable this IP pool. So no IP DHCP pool VLAN 2 pool. And this is going to delete that config. So if we want to add this back later, we'll have to reconfigure it. So that is the command to get rid of that. So if we look at our running config, the DHCP pool is gone. The excluded addresses bit is still here, but the DHCP pool config is gone, so that's fine. If we really wanted to clean things up, we would get rid of those excluded addresses as well. But I'm not going to do that right now. One other thing I'm going to do, look at the DHCP bindings, and there's nothing bound. So it might also, if you have something bound, the router might not handle that correctly. So now that we have the router configured the way it needs to be configured, we will go ahead and turn the interface back on for each 0 and hope that it gets an IP address from our Linux DHCP server. So there we go. We were able to get an IP from the Linux DHCP server. So now we can look at the information. We got an IP address 10.1.1.50, our default routes 10.1.1.1, and our DNS server 100, 100 to 102. And if we test getting out to our CNT web server again, it still works. So that takes care of us getting the DHCP for VLAN 2 from the server that is in VLAN 3. So, yeah, so that's what we need to do.